Well, over the next hour, we'll be discussing the elections in Zimbabwe after African Observer Group said they were free and peaceful. The opposition MDC says they were nothing of the kind. Plus, we'll focus on Mugabe the man. Has he been a good leader for Zimbabwe? We'll speak to guests in Harare and in Johannesburg. And as the diplomatic fallout continues following Russia's decision to grant temporary asylum to Edward Snowden, we'll look at whether he's worth it to either side. As ever, you can get in touch in a variety of ways. They'll be on screen throughout the programme.
People are going to want to know. Let's just say something.
Well, welcome to the programme. We'll also be talking a little bit later on about Silvio Berlusconi's continued upholding of his prison sentence for tax fraud. WorldhaveyourSay.com is the place to go if you want to upload your thoughts on that. But first, let's talk about Zimbabwe. Let me introduce you to guests that we have with us for the next half an hour or so. Andile Mtama is editor of New Frank Talk Journal in Johannesburg. Ruveniko Parinyatwa is presenter on ZFM Stereo. And Chifamba Sitole is a Zimbabwean journalist. Ruveniko, first of all, from your point of view, do you have faith in these elections?
Hi, thanks for the question. I do have a lot of faith in these elections because they've just happened, and there was a lot of speculation before about how they would happen and how they might turn out or how they might go wrong. But I think that where we are right now, with the results still coming in, I think I do have a lot of faith. I think that those that did manage to vote managed to put their vote through, and now we just have faith that the results will be reflected and that they will reflect the will of the people.
So what about you, Chifamba? Do you think that the results will reflect the will of the people?
I think that it's very difficult for the opposition to contest the verdict that the election results broadly reflect the will of the people. Of course, incidences of irregularities and also aspects of the electoral system can be pointed out as having disadvantaged the opposition. But on the whole, it is very difficult to say that the result is not credible.
Andile, the MDC, for example, Morgan Tsvangirai's party, the opposition, is saying that up to 1 million people were not able to vote. How can that reflect the will of the people?
The Zimbabwean government for having run a fairly orderly election, and we know that the initial comment from the African Union is that the election is both peaceful, orderly and fair. And so from that point of view, Morgan is going to have major problems to explain why he is attacking these elections. Clearly, the opposition in Zimbabwe has not done well in the past 4 or 5 years. Morgan has not shown the kind of leadership was expected from the people. His party remains intact. His own personal conduct does not inspire confidence. And on the other hand, ZANU-PF in power with its land reclamation program and including its indigenization program has shown that, in fact, it is able to rule and possibly rule in the interest of the people. Great economic upturn in Zimbabwe is happening. Things are changing. Opposition can no longer claim and hope for a crisis, cannot run and win an election on the basis of a crisis anymore. ZANU-PF has shown it's a party of decolonization. What does MDC stand for? Clearly, from what we can see, it is a party of neo-colonialism. It wants to reverse the sort of gains. And so the Zimbabwean people, I'm sure, are rejecting that. They want change, but they don't want change that means going back
I'm
to
sure the
colonialism.
MDC would say that they don't at all endorse neo-colonialism. That's not what they want. They're saying they want democracy, and they don't feel that, in fact, that this result in the election has been free and fair. Let's play you this video. It's from the head of the African Union Observer Mission. It's the former Nigerian President Obasanjo who's dismissed complaints of fraud.
I have never seen any election that is perfect. The point has always been and will always be how much are the infractions imperfections have affected the result of the election being a reflection of the will of the people.
Well, Ruvekenho, we heard there that it is reflecting the will of the people. But if so many people and so many supporters of the MDC believe that this hasn't been a free and fair election, where does this leave Zimbabwe now?
Well, the thing is, there was a quote that I read on these social networks this week that said, the elections are free and fair until somebody wins. And it's naturally expected that the minute that any party wins, and especially ZANU-PF wins, there's going to be speculation and there's going to be accusation of the elections not having been free and fair. And I think that where it takes Zimbabwe now, to answer your question, is that it leaves us in a position where we have to understand that these elections were conducted and that the results certainly will reflect the will of the people. And as a nation, I think we need to reach a point now where we accept what the results are. That is how it is. And as the ZANU-PF has been saying, that if Morgan Tsvangirai wants to object the results of the elections, he must prove it. I think we're at a stage as well where all the numbers speak for themselves. The results reflect that ZANU-PF is in the lead at the moment, and we must accept that as a people because we're trying to progress. And if there's any conflict or any questions about how credible those elections are, I think all that we need is proof. As a nation, we're waiting for results, and if anybody objects, they must provide hard evidence and hard facts to try and challenge the outcome of what the elections have been.
Well, Chifamba, when we're talking about hard facts, the 7,000 election observers inside Zimbabwe, the local observers, have said they feel that the election has been seriously compromised. So there's a real problem there, isn't there? There's a split between the African Union that says this has been free and the local observers who are saying anything but.
Well, it's very difficult to reconcile those two positions because the local observers are there for a much longer period of time, and they have also a greater penetration into the country, and so can provide evidence from as far as possible throughout the territory. But having said that, it strikes me as a bit curious the magnitude of the number of people that they claim have been turned away. On our voting day itself, what was reflected at polling stations, and I have spoken to people, journalists and colleagues of mine in civil society who are inside the country and have been at polling stations, the picture that comes vis-a-vis the one being presented by the Zimbabwe Election Support Network do not quite tally. So there is a bit of controversy there in trying to reconcile those two positions. And at this rate, I would look at broadly the election itself, the outcome, on the basis of the verdicts that have been given both by SADC and the African Union, notwithstanding the incidences of irregularities and some of the systemic outstanding issues that were there when the election was conducted. I still nonetheless believe that the outcome of the election generally or broadly reflects the will of the voting people.
And Dile, speak to Chifamba, because he's expressing there what many people, the concerns that many people have, that there were irregularities. And it's difficult for people to have faith in a system when irregularities have been identified.
We must recognize that Zimbabwe comes through a massive crisis. So the level of organization, in fact, for me, is impressive, given the crisis which is ongoing. Of course, and I said earlier on, it is abating. From that point of view, we must, I think, recognize the huge progress that has gone on. These local election monitors, I've just seen WikiLeaks, by the way, showing that they are being funded by the US aid and the National Economic Endowment of the United States of America. Now, this is a problem. The Zimbabwean elections are not free of international interests. Who speaks for what is happening in Zimbabwe is always linked to the larger programs of whether colonization or decolonization. From where I'm sitting in South Africa, having followed very closely, trying to understand what's going on in Zimbabwe, I am inclined to go with my colleagues in the studio in Zimbabwe and also to go with the African Union. These local observers and NGOs controlled, paid for by Americans, and the US government is one of those governments which have been totally hostile to the Zimbabwean decolonization program, particularly land reclamation and now the indigenization process.
If I may come in there.
Go ahead.
Yes, if I may come in, I think it is stretching it a bit for Andile to allege a conspiracy on, by the Americans or imperialists out there manipulating local observers in order to bring about a verdict that subverts the outcome of the elections. I think that what Riveneko said earlier, that whoever has evidence, hard evidence of irregularities from the voting, let them present it. And this is the challenge to the ZESEN, that having put forward their own verdict that they have unearthed these massive irregularities, put them forward systematically and let those concerns be followed up through the formal channels or even raised with SADC and the AU if they are significant enough to turn the outcome of the elections, or at least to register significantly as a factor that may have compromised the outcome. But to allege that some locals are being used by some imperialists in a subversive plot, I think that is a bit of fantasy.
I'm not alleging, I'm telling you what WikiLeaks has just revealed. I mean, it's WikiLeaks, you can Google it.
You might as well say
it
all
shows
the
that,
developmental NGOs in the country that are receiving funds from external sources are all in the pay of these imperialist countries.
I'm being very specific. I'm being very specific in relationship to the elections, in relationship to the interest of USAID, in the interest of the National Economic Endowment of America, which we know where it stands politically in relationship to Zimbabwe. I'm not going to accept that such a consistent political conspiracy against Zimbabwe, today all of a sudden, I must accept that those guys do not have interest. They do. Zimbabwean elections are very important for Africa, are very important for transformation, and our traditional colonial enemies and imperialism has an interest in a particular projection of Zimbabwe.
No, I think it is fair to say. It is fair. No, it is fair to say. I think it is fair, without going on a leap. It is fair to say that these local observers have made a serious allegation and they claim to have evidence. Let them present the evidence and let the evidence fall or stand on its basis. But I think to then go by way of conjecture and speculate about what plot is out there, for the moment, we might cloud or muddy the situation. Let us wait and see if that evidence is credible. Can it stand to scrutiny?
Well, gentlemen, as you speak, I can see that Riveneko is very animated and trying to get involved. Riveneko, we're going to bring up your microphone now. We haven't heard what you've said so far. If you just take a pause for a moment, just explain to us what you're saying.
To remember who these elections are for, and importantly, who they're about.
That is so frustrating because it appears like Riveneko can't actually hear what we're saying right now at the moment. We'll try and sort that line out. But first, let's go over to the BBC's World's Newsroom because I want to get a flavour of these conversations that we're hearing here are being reflected on the comments that are coming into us here. Let's speak to BBC Africa online editor Joseph Winter. Are you hearing these kind of conversations?
Well, yes, that's the kind of conversation. To be honest, that's the debate that's been going around in Zimbabwe since the year 2000 and even before. President Robert Mugabe has always portrayed himself as fighting for the rights of his people and fighting against the colonial powers. Since the MDC was formed in 2000, it's been Morgan Tsvangirai, its leader, has been saying let's move on from that, and he's talking about fighting for jobs and economic prosperity.
I was just actually listening to Joseph and was thinking how similar and how close is this discussion to the hearts of the Russians and former Soviet Union people as well, nations as well. Every time when the elections come about, there is obviously all this conversation and dispute and debates about imperialism, about the foreign endowments, foreign NGOs attempt to interfere with the will of the people in that particular country, be it Russia or, I don't know, Ukraine or another country. So it's sort of very close to the hearts of so many people.
Pamil Ismailov from BBC Russian, thank you. And we'll be going back to speak to our guests in the World's Newsroom a little later on. So many of you getting in touch with us, unsurprisingly from Zimbabwe, but also from Gambia, Nigeria, the US, South Africa, Saudi Arabia. Do keep your comments coming into us. They come straight to me here on my tablet, and we'll try and read as many of them as we can. Stay with us, and we'll carry on talking in the next few minutes.
No, I absolutely talking about it. So let me say something. No, I absolutely talking about it. So let me say something.
Welcome back to World Have Your Say. We're discussing the elections in Zimbabwe. Let's pull up this comment straight away to discuss it with our guests. It's from Fraser Nelson, who writes for the Telegraph newspaper here in the UK. He says, for those who like to believe that political freedom is the surest route to prosperity, this is deeply depressing news. This, of course, being the fact that there was such hyperinflation before the 2008 election. It caused so much violence for the people of Zimbabwe. But that's managed to be turned around by President Mugabe and also by Morgan Tsvangirai. And for many people, they see it depressing that, in fact, this has been a result for President Mugabe. Still with us is Reuven Echo. Do you agree with that it's depressing that just because the economy's got sorted, this has helped Robert Mugabe?
Sorry, I can't hear. Just repeat the question, please.
We are having a few problems with your line. I do apologise. One of the comments which has come from a UK journalist has been that it's deeply depressing that Robert Mugabe has done so well in this election purely because the economy has improved so dramatically since the last election in 2008.
Well, the economy has improved dramatically, considerably, and there's talk of how it's going to improve even more. With the president in power now, I mean, if the president wins these elections, as it looks like he has, he's promised that he'll bring back the Zimbabwe dollar, and we will stabilize. So I think that it is frustrating for people to see how we are already doing better and how we've got plans to get even better. So I think that when we look at our economy, we must remember that what we've just come out of was a GNU. And the GNU did collectively do a lot of work to secure our economy and put us back at a place where we can say that we are going to even think of introducing our Zimbabwe dollar again. So to have President Robert Mugabe behind that success must frustrate a lot of people who don't believe in him.
Let's pull up another comment now, which has come in. It's from the Herald newspaper in Zimbabwe. It says, you must show grace in defeat, Mr. Tsvangirai. Robert Mugabe is a man revered worldwide. Chifamba, do you want to respond to that actually Morgan Tsvangirai now, if it's discovered that, as many people suspect, Robert Mugabe has indeed won this election, Morgan Tsvangirai has to accept that?
Short of presenting hard evidence that proves that the magnitude of Robert Mugabe's and ZANU-PF's victory was based on fraud, then the reasonable thing for Morgan Tsvangirai to do, and indeed in the interest of national unity and stability, is to concede that the outcome generally and broadly reflects the will of the people, and it is time to move on to the rebuilding of the country, and indeed also for the MDC itself to introspect and ask itself hard questions concerning their own identity and their own objective and agenda in this future now that is now dominated clearly by ZANU-PF.
And Dile, I know that you've written an article saying that Robert Mugabe is one of the greatest African leaders. Do you ever feel uncomfortable that one man has been in power for over 30 years and maybe change would be good for your country?
Well, I think that it's superficial to talk about the years of being in office. I think what is fundamental is whether the agenda of transforming our societies has been put on a good path. When we talk right now about Zimbabwe and economic stability, we must remember we're not just talking about economic stability, we're talking about a transformed economy. Before the year 2000, about 6,000 white settler farmers owned 80% of Zimbabwe. Today, we're talking about ownership of that land by more than 200 families. In fact, when you look at who controlled what commodities from, say, tobacco, cotton, today, that has changed. Massive number of black farmers are, in fact, benefiting and are growing that economy. So it's not just the stabilization, but key, it is the transformation of an economy from a colonial ownership pattern to a decolonized situation. As a South African, I envy what is happening in Zimbabwe because we are before 1980 in terms of our colonial nature, structure of our economy.
If I may come in. All right. I think that President Robert Mugabe is indeed a leader who stands for certain clear principles. He's a Pan-Africanist, a nationalist, and does believe in national sovereignty, self-determination in the economy as well as in politics. That is well and good. You have principle on the one hand, and then you have realpolitik. You have the experience of a leader in power and in government. And being in power for the last 33 years, there is a harvest of both negatives and positives that come with it, inevitably. And I think this is one thing that needs to be admitted, that Robert Mugabe has not been consistently this great leader on account of the empowerment policies that are now coming into fruition. Let's give the man his dues over his record. Education, social transformation in the 1980s, the most literate society in Africa. But these things have also come with gross corruption, which has not been acted upon. They've also come with a lot of violence throughout elections. It had become the norm for massive amounts of people to die in elections, which is why this has been a breath of fresh air. And even as we're celebrating the dawn of a new Zimbabwe, 20,000 of our fellow citizens died in the Matabeleland massacres in an incident that was hardly acknowledged. The president expressed regret but not apology over it. It still remains a burning issue to the point that even some people from within the region are mobilizing politically around it because it has been ignored and not been addressed. We have the Operation Murambachina, sorry, my headpiece is falling out. We have the Operation Murambachina that displaced loads of people in urban areas, and this came on President Mugabe's watch. So you have to be consistent and marry the two together. Granted, in terms of economic freedom, the policies of land reform and economic indigenization are grand policies, transformative policies. Their application has left much to be desired. It is at the implementation stage that a lot of controversy comes through, and national consensus fails not on the basis of principle, which is perhaps maybe what ZANU-PF would like to allege of its adversaries. They do not oppose land reform. They do not oppose the idea of anchoring the economy nationally, but it is the methods and the conversation that should attend the implementation of, or even conceptualization of every grand national policy. It is eschewed in favor of ramrodding it through, and usually in the context of electoral politics, and that is the tragedy, because what it does.
I hope you'll forgive me for jumping in, because I just want to go back to Ruveneko for a moment. Do you feel uncomfortable that one man has been in power in your country for over 30 years, whether you support him or not, the general concept of being in power for that long?
Well, this is something that, I think it's about a society. I think it's different when we look at the world. A lot of people will observe and say it's not normal for someone to be in power for 33 years. I think that people also forget that in Zimbabwe, our president does not just, he has not just appealed to our economy and our structures, he's also appealed to society, which is why he's been in power for 33 years.
I do hope you'll forgive me for jumping in. That music means we are coming to the end of this part of the programme. Lots more to come. You can tweet us using the hashtag WHYS. Hello, I'm Chloe Tilley. This is World Have Your Say, and we're discussing the diplomatic fallout from Edward Snowden being granted temporary asylum in Russia.
Talking about it.
Top priority.
I experience.
This is chaos. People are going to want to know. Let's just say something.
And welcome back to the programme. So many of you getting in touch with us from Ghana, from Japan, Afghanistan, India, Libya. Do keep your comments coming into us. Now, for the next few minutes of the programme, we're going to discuss the case of Edward Snowden. Of course, yesterday, Russia said they were going to grant him temporary asylum. It's just for a year. He can now stay in Russia. And as you can imagine, the US is not terribly happy about this. Let me introduce you to the guests we are joined by to discuss this. Christopher Burgess is CEO of Prevendra Security and formerly in the CIA for 30 years. He's in Washington. And Dmitry Linik is Bureau Chief of the Voice of Russia in the UK. Also, you'll recognise, still with us, is Famil Ismailov from BBC Russian. Dmitry, first of all, welcome to World Have Your Say. Why do you think Russia decided to grant temporary asylum to Edward Snowden?
I think the choice was fairly difficult. The choice was either to, well, effectively expel Edward Snowden, which would not be a very good moral stance. The choice to welcome him with open arms would have been likewise awkward for two-way relations. So I think the Russian authorities took sort of a middle line, if you will, middle of the road line, and accepted the man, but with the condition that he would not continue with his leaks.
Christopher, what's your view on it?
I agree with Dmitry on this. Russia, and Putin specifically, was caught between a rock and a hard spot. Number one, allowing Snowden to transit Russia en route to a third location allowed Snowden to just stay. And in staying, he played a card that he was counting on Russia would not send him to the United States. The U.S. did revoke his passport, but allowed him to have a travel document that would allow him to travel, but that would be limited traveling only directly to the United States. So I think he's there. Putin didn't he could have sent him back, as the White House had requested. DOJ provided plenty of fodder for the immigration folks to consider. The fact that he is there, I think, will have a deleterious effect on relationships.
And for you, Dmitry, do you think it will have a longer-term impact on relations between the US and Russia?
I really don't see the point of that. I mean, when you sort of think back to the time that NATO broke its admittedly unwritten promise not to expand into Eastern Europe and potentially former Soviet republics, that was a big spat. When you deploy ABM system missiles on Russia's doorstep, that's a spat. If you talk about sort of, if you encourage almost President Saakashvili to pick a fight with Russia, I'm talking about the Russia-Georgia war, of course, that's a big spat. Now, Snowden, I don't think so.
Thanks.
Christopher, what do you think? Do you think it's a big spat, or we're going to forget about it in a few weeks?
I think it's a subtext to the greater U.S.-Russian relationships. I do think it'll have an immediate impact. I predict that we'll see President Obama going to the G20 meeting in St. Petersburg, but we'll probably forego a bilateral meeting with Putin just because of the irritation that is so fresh right now. And I think we're just going to have to wait and see how Mr. Snowden acclimates into Russia and what's done with his 100,000 to 1 million records that he allegedly has.
Well, Christopher and Dmitry, I wonder if you want to respond to this comment, which we can pull up right now from Kommersant newspaper. It says, any other decision would mean Russia would lose face. We would no longer be factored into US decision-making. Christopher, do you think that that was probably part of the thinking?
Absolutely. As I said at the outset, I see Putin was between a rock and a hard spot. If he sent Snowden back, he was acquiescing to the U.S., and I don't think it's anyone who would be surprised to understand that Putin has put forward a somewhat aggressive stance toward the United States, and that could be construed as a sign of weakness, especially within his electorate.
Let's bring in Famil Ismailov from BBC Russian in the World's newsroom. Famil, what sort of conversations are you hearing coming into the BBC about this issue?
Well, mostly people actually support Russia's decision to give temporary asylum to Edward Snowden. And it's probably not just because of the anti-American propaganda which they can hear on TV and on radio, but it's mostly also on humanitarian reasons. They see a young man who is in a very difficult situation, and here comes the Russian government that sort of helps him, and the people see it in a positive way. More than that, only crossing the Sheremetyevo into the Russian soil, he was immediately offered a job at one of the biggest social media networks in Russia, and he was offered there were offers of help and even marriage. So there's lots of support for him.
Do you think there's any danger, Dmitry, that next month President Obama is meant to be meeting President Putin in Russia? Do you think there's any realistic chance that that meeting won't happen as a result of this case?
I don't think there's a chance that this could go that far. President Putin did have to play a sort of a careful line between, essentially two factions in Russian society, I guess. One faction would be sort of broadly described as nationalists, and human rights champions among them, who would be, in favor of granting Snowden asylum. On the other hand, there's the human rights champions, kind of Washington or West-oriented, who did not want Snowden to get asylum in Russia. So that's a careful course that President Putin had to plot, and I don't think there's been sort of any amount of anti-American propaganda to which one of the speakers referred to that would have influenced that decision.
Dmitry and Christopher, let me introduce you to Andrei Soldatov, who is an investigative journalist in Moscow, joins us now. Welcome to the programme, Andrei. We were talking there about whether there will be any long-term detrimental effects of taking Edward Snowden in by Moscow. What are your views on that?
Well, I think we can expect some long-term consequences in terms of the global regulation of what's going on the internet. And I think that, that Russia for long propagated the ideas to change completely the rules how the internet is governed now, and now it's mostly governed by the United States. So it was the idea from the first day when Snowden appeared in Moscow that the Kremlin might use Snowden's revelations as some sort of pretext to launch a new wave of offensive and to say something that we need to do something with global services on the Russian soil and globally. And we saw that actually it's already happened. And many Russian MPs and already proposed some ideas how to make Russian internet sovereign and more protected from the intrusion from the United States on cyberspace.
Christopher, speak to Andrei.
I think it's a double-edged sword. I don't see the U.S. intrusion into cyberspace as controlling the networks per se. The internet is a global network that every country relies on now. It's gone well beyond a nice-to-have to a system that we all rely on for commerce, communications, and infrastructure. I understand the Russian discussion points on putting borders on the internet. I think that borders on the internet are not a good idea. I believe openness of the internet is what we need.
Andrei?
Well, I think it's, I totally agree. To me, the problem is that I think it's quite depressing but Russia is not alone in propagating these ideas of sovereign internet. That last week Brazil suggested that maybe we need to force the local ISPs, local internet services providers, to have their servers hosted on Brazilian soil exactly because of Snowden's revelations. So it might be the wave of countries. And last December, when Russia first time announced the ideas of sovereign internet, Russia was supported by 89 countries. So I'm wondering how many countries might support these kind of ideas now after Snowden.
Dmitry, I saw that you were trying to get in.
Yes, indeed. Just this morning, we find that 7 major companies are cooperating with NSA, with American National Security Agency, on effectively supplying data that they accumulate on internet users. And of course, in that context, what Andrei Soldatov is saying, I think, is very valid. It's a valid point that, yes, countries will tend to strive for sovereignty on the internet as well, even though that probably runs against the very concept.
While we talk, gentlemen, comments are coming into us. Nathan in Germany has tweeted us using the hashtag WHYS. He says, if the US government was transparent from the start, there would be no need for whistleblowing. Christopher, it's a valid point, isn't it?
To some extent. I will concede I am disturbed that during the tenure of President Obama, only one FISA court petition has been rejected. So I agree that some rigor needs to be taken there and perhaps some review. On the other hand, I believe every nation needs a strong intelligence presence, and every nation does have the right to protect itself. So while we're talking about the United States, I think if you took a broad swath of the countries in the world, every intelligence agency protects its national interests.
Dimitri, do you think that now that Edward Snowden has got a year effectively in Russia, he's got this temporary asylum, President Putin was keen to say that he wanted the leaking to stop. Leaks have come out in recent days. Do you think the leaking will now stop?
Well, it's hard to say. It's up to Snowden. I guess if the leaks continue...
I guess what I'm saying, Dimitri, is do you think that the Russian authorities will clamp down on him and potentially throw him out if he does leak more?
Well, it's up to the Russian authorities to, I guess, watch how the situation develops. I think the condition was there, put down very clearly, that the leaks have to stop. If Snowden does go on with that, or maybe it's just because, you know, some of the material is out of his hands and is being leaked without his involvement, effectively. That's also an option. So the authorities in Russia will have to look into that and just weigh the consequences, including the consequences for two-way relations.
Christopher, I can see you nodding.
Yeah. Indeed. I agree with what Dimitri is saying here. I believe that it's a little bit like toothpaste out of the tube. The information has already been provided to The Guardian. The Guardian has its own cadence that they're releasing the information to. Has all of his information been released to The Guardian? Only The Guardian and Snowden know. Has his information been shared with the Russian authorities or with the Chinese authorities when he was in Hong Kong? One would presume so. And thus, they have to have a barometer on what can be expected to be released in the future that is in the hands of The Guardian already and thus out of Snowden's control. And that I think they will have Snowden under tight control. And if he crosses the line, I think they'll boot him out because he's as much a liability as he is a humanitarian perspective or a humanitarian gesture here. If he goes sideways, there's no upside to him remaining.
Andre, you're an investigative journalist yourself. Do you think these leaks will stop now?
Yeah, I think, actually, I think that this last publication, what was published this week, would be the last publication based on the revelations of Snowden. I think, well, you remember that three days before this latest revelation, latest publication, Snowden's lawyer Kucherena made this point about that actually some materials might be already in the hand of the Guardian and some other people, and so that's why Snowden cannot take responsibility for the publication. But it was this remark was made before the latest publication, and now I think this might be it was all stuff that Snowden actually has at hand. So maybe that might explain why Snowden actually left Sheremetyevo, because he has nothing to expose after that.
Let's pull up another comment which has come into us here. It's from Wisco Girl in Virginia on Twitter. When your government trusts you with a security clearance and you betray it, you're a traitor. Do you think, Dimitri, that if the do you think, Christopher, if the roles had been reversed and if a Russian person was coming over with information to the US, that the US would have done exactly what Russia has done?
I think the U.S. would have listened to what the individual had to offer. If an individual is coming and, in essence, what you described as someone defecting to the United States with secrets that he or she has brought from another country, Russia in this case, that happened with great regularity during the Cold War. And in each of those instances, the individual was accepted into the U.S. and their information processed into the system. To call Snowden a traitor, I think, is a harsh term. That's normally reserved for times of war. I would call him an individual who broke trust with his employer and, by extension, his employer's clients, the government. And thus, he's engaged in criminal activities and has been indicted on three counts.
Let's bring in Jeffrey Mankoff, who is Deputy Director and Fellow of the Russia and Eurasia Programme at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. Jeffrey, welcome to World Have Your Say. We've been talking about the diplomatic fallout of Russia deciding to take in Edward Snowden, albeit on a temporary basis. Do you think that there will be a long-term diplomatic impact?
A long-term impact, probably not. Clearly, this is a relationship that has been much more troubled over the past year or so for a variety of reasons, and this is just one more brick in the wall, I suppose you could say. But that said, there are so many issues where the U.S. and the Russians need to talk to each other if they're going to reach outcomes that both of them are looking for. And I mean, I think of Syria, for example, where discussions are still underway over holding this Geneva conference later this year. The withdrawal from Afghanistan, in which Russia is going to play a significant role. Non-proliferation and arms control, which is something that President Obama has recently given new emphasis to. I mean, these are all areas where the U.S. and Russia are going to need to work together if...
Okay, Jeffrey, so you're saying that it needs to be a case of the U.S. and Russia working together. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll carry on talking.
No, I talking about it. Let me say something. No, I talking about it. Let me say something.
Hello, I'm Chloe Tilley. Welcome back. Well, for the last few minutes of the programme, we're going to discuss Silvio Berlusconi and his conviction for tax fraud being upheld. So many of you have got in touch with us to add your thoughts to this debate. In fact, we talked about it a little bit earlier on our programme on the BBC World Service. Well, before we hear some comments from Italians themselves, let's hear from the man himself.
In exchange for my commitment over the course of nearly 20 years for my country, now almost at the end of my life, I receive as a present allegations and judgment based on nothing at all. It even takes away my personal freedom and political rights. Is this the way Italy recognises the sacrifices and commitments of its best citizens? Is this the Italy we love? Is this the Italy we want?
My name is Flavia Taggiasco and I'm a freelance journalist based in Rome. I think that the Supreme Court ruling last night against Silvio Berlusconi has put an end to his active political career, at least for the next 6 years. But I really don't think that we've seen the last of him. He will probably be leading his party from the sidelines for the next few years. The speech that he gave last night, the 9-minute speech that he gave last night on television, was a clear sign of this. He was definitely appealing to his electorate, to all those people who think that he is a victim of a very unfair judicial system.
Hi, my name is Antonella Ciancio. I'm an Italian journalist and I'm based in Washington, D.C. Let me just say that I don't think that we are seeing the end of Berlusconi as a politician yet. He has said that he would come back, and I'm sure he will come back. What has not changed in Italy also is this debate about whether we love or hate Berlusconi, whether women love or hate Berlusconi. What I can say is that we are still divided, and Italy doesn't seem ready to move on. So we will be talking about him for a long time.
Well, Luca de Alessandro from the People of Freedom Party has said that solidarity with Silvio Berlusconi, who is more innocent and clean than those who unjustly convicted him. Thanks for watching. We'll speak again soon.